So you have officially made it to episode, I think, 4. Yeah, 4. Yeah, episode 4. This is topic number 4. Um, so this is focusing on assistive technology and communication. So, as per usual, I will do an overview of what we're talking about. I will probably talk more in terms of personal experience with this topic. Um, I do know quite a bit in terms of communication and how it can be used due to our class course overall, but I have done some prior research. But a lot of this will be just talking about how devices can be used. I'm talking more from like not an educational like setting, but more so in terms of like a public environment type setting. So, what I mean by this is that like it'll be more of in like a cafe situation, like a restaurant or stuff like that. It'll be in that type of environment. Um, or like overall, like just every day to day usage. So let's get started. So, assistive technology overall, there has been a delay in accessibility when new technology is announced because it is so new that we don't know how to apply it to what we already know. So, in order to like think about this and understand it, let's start thinking about cell phones. Cell phones, when they first came out, we didn't know how to be like, this will be great for someone who's deaf and hard of hearing. This will be great for someone who's blind. Stuff like that. Like we never thought about cell phones like that when they first like started out. What we thought about cell phones was how it was applicable to able-bodied people who were like, yep, I know how to use a phone. I can use it. Whoop whoop. I can see the screen. I can touch the buttons. I don't have problems with my motor skills, my fine motor skills. We never thought about it for people who do not have that. Um, so I will also talk about that. I want to talk specifically about hearing aid compatibility. I want to talk about that because it is a big thing nowadays in terms of education, in terms of just accessibility overall for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. And as a deaf education major, I think it's important to talk about and discuss because it is so close to my heart because I see it with the children that I work with. I see it with my brother. I see it on a personal level. I see it in a professional level. I see it even in my own retail jobs currently. I also want to talk about that in terms of my personal retail experience. I work at Starbucks. I have deaf customers come in. When I'm not there, they're like ordering their stuff. They write out their order or they point at the board behind me. I will get more into that when I am so excited about this episode. And then, okay, next thing I want to talk about is picture boards, communication apps, / tablets, text-to-speech devices, speech-to-text devices. I want to once again talk about visual schedules because they are also important when it comes to just communication. I think it's important. I think it's really intriguing to see in terms of like communication, how it's applicable in environments that aren't in schools. But I will still connect this to a school. I promise. As an education major, I gotta do that. But overall, let's talk about it. So, delay in accessibility when new technology is announced. Nowadays, it's a bit more easily accessible because technology has furthered a lot. But there's still moments in our times where we're like, wow, how can this be accessible? We need to explore these features before we can give it as an option to students. Or even just options to people in general, in the public. We also need to think about cost. A lot of devices are really expensive. If we think about an iPhone right now, an iPhone goes for 1.2K, maybe 1.5K, depending on what you get, how much gigabytes you have storage-wise, how much it is to maintain a phone bill. You can buy an iPhone and have no storage, but you have to think about Wi-Fi. You have to think about internet. You have to think about the privileges that it comes with getting devices like that. Even though they are really good in terms of accessibility, it is so important to think about that. So let's talk about cell phones. Okay, So cell phones, they have been evolving extremely quickly over the last like decade, more than a decade, since I was born. I'm born in 2001. I was to the point where technology was prevalent, but I still remember times where I didn't have like a computer. I didn't have stuff like that. And so thinking about it in terms of people who need that accessibility of like more newer technology. Think about it in that terms. It's wow, what we look back at that devices that they used and we're like, wow, that's really old school. But that was so high tech for them back then that it's like, wow, that's baffling. For doing that, that's impressive. But let me get back to topic. So, cell phones. Cell phones are extremely new. They constantly change, but thinking about how they originally started, they weren't accessible to like people who had low visual impairments. Like they couldn't see the menu. There was an extensive like base, buttons, fine motor skills, hard to hit for people, and you never could tell if you were paying for a free roaming call or $1 per minute during like older times. There was no option for like voice output. It wasn't until newer times, and text to speech and stuff like that needed an additional service plan. I remember, and I googled this a bit more, is that you needed an additional service plan in order to like have a text to speech option or and stuff like that. I think that is wow. In order to get accessibility, you needed to pay more. That is ridiculous. But thinking about it, it makes sense because our society runs off capitalism. It runs off money. It runs off by like people needing things. So they make what's needed expensive. But anywho, in terms of accessibility, that is ridiculous. But nowadays, our accessibility is, for example, iPhones. You can easily change for deaf and hard of hearing people. You can put the flash on to alert because you can't hear the ringer. For blind people, you have ringers. You can have font size be bigger than the normal. You can have really big font size. You can have it read to you. Text to speech is already implemented in your phone. You can't hit those fine motor skills. That's fine. There's touch screens. Stuff like that. It's so important to understand how far we've come in terms of technology. Let's talk about hearing aid compatibility. So hearing aid compatibility in terms of phones, it was important. I think it was in the Hearing Aid Compatibility Act in 1988, I believe, or 87. I don't remember off the top of my head. But I remember learning about that and I was like, wow, there's a law that had hearing aid compatibility in terms of this was required, necessary for most phones. Having that Bluetooth option to connect to hearing aids is extremely important because phone services and hearing people, it's important because, and then you have video phones, stuff like that. It's important because it allows accessibility to people who are hard of hearing, who have the technology to hear, but having a phone up to the ear, they can't hear it the same way that they would. So they would have to have their phone on speaker. It is so interesting to think about. Yeah, I will come back to that point. I will circle back to it. Next is picture boards. Picture boards, having that accessible in terms of communication amongst ordering things at a retail place, like coffee places, restaurants, having pictures makes it easier for people to understand what they're ordering, let alone what it is, but also putting on, be like, this is what I want. And cause in case they can't like read, reading menus are hard. Braille, for example, Braille menus need to be available, stuff like that. Another thing, communication apps, they're really big these days. A lot of people who are deaf that I interact with, when we go out and they don't want me to order for them as a hearing person, I get it. In terms, it gives them independence because they're like, yeah, I can do it. That's no problem. That's fine. But like sometimes my friends are like, oh, like I want you to order for me. Please, like order my food. I don't want to whip out my phone, type out my order, and then have to play it or wait for them to read it, and then I have to wait for them to write back. You're here, but like still, having those apps is extremely important. Next thing I want to talk about is text to speech and speech to text. Speech to text or text to speech. I'm sorry. In terms of communication, is important for especially for deaf individuals. Especially when you're going through a drive-through. because it can be played for them through a drive-through, but you can't hear them, and you'll just be like, I have to pull through, I'm deaf. Having that just played through it makes it so much easier for ordering, and making it easier for retail servicers to be like, yes, this is what I need to do. Speech to text, also great for blind impaired people who are writing messages, texting, emailing, doing stuff like that. It makes it so much easier for them. Visual supports in terms of visual schedules, that is also important. Having a visual schedule in terms of, even in just schools, having a visual schedule for students to be like, this is how our day's going, this is how our classes are going, especially for younger students, it makes it easier for them to transition into their next class, which makes it easier to communicate with them and be like, all right, guys, we can look at the visual, like, let's look at our schedule, let's look what's next, what are we going to do next, and have them transition more easily and effectively. I did want to go back to hearing aid compatibility. So there's a bunch of different options in terms of not even FM systems in terms of schools, but even just in everyday activities. For example, like a lot of cochlear implants and a lot of hearing aids, you can connect Bluetooth through your phone, or there's like a little like device. My brother has this little device he used to use that like sat right here, and it was for like speaking and using calls while his hearing aids were in. It was connected to his hearing aids. He had to be in a certain like radius of it, but it still worked. But now his newer hearing aids, it just connects to his phone automatically, and he can control it through an app and stuff like that. It's so cool to see the compatibility now versus before, because people used to use Vest in order to even have hearing aids. It was big and clunky, and like thinking about it in terms of accessibility and assistive technology, having those devices is a privilege, but it's so important, and people should be getting these devices in order to communicate in an effective manner in a society that they choose, or in a way that they want to choose. So that has been episode 4. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I would love to hear your thoughts about stuff. So yeah, have a great day.